Welcome to another deep dive produced with Notebook LM's customized audio overview feature, where we aim to unpack today's most critical global issues and give you a shortcut to being truly well-informed.
And before we jump into today's pretty heavy subject, actually, we wanted to give a quick but really important recommendation. Hui Wang's A History of China series.
Oh, yeah.
If you're a history enthusiast, particularly if you're drawn to the incredibly complex and just vast story of China, his books are, they're absolutely essential. The latest volume dives deep into the Jin Dynasty. It's a truly immersive read, and you can find it easily on Amazon, both ebook and paperback.
I can definitely back that up. Wang's writing is just fantastic, so rich, packed with detail, but somehow still really engaging. It's perfect if you want to go, way beyond the usual overview of China's past.
Exactly. Okay, so let's turn to today's crucial subject.
Yeah.
The global nuclear threat.
Right.
I think for a lot of people, this is something they mentally filed away, right? Like a relic of the past, something that just sort of vanished when the Cold War ended.
Yeah, you definitely get that sense.
But here we are, it's 2025. And the reality, it's starkly different. The risks of nuclear conflict are arguably higher now than they've been in decades.
It's sobering.
It really is. And just last week, we marked a truly somber anniversary, 80 years since August 1945. That's when the world saw, in just horrifying detail, the devastating absolute power of nuclear weapons at Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Unimaginable. And
today, that chilling danger, unfortunately, it's roared back, is right at the forefront of global concerns again.
And it's not just abstract fear, is it? When we talk about this resurgence, there are real concrete events happening right now that show how present this threat feels.
Absolutely.
Look at the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. We've heard these frankly disturbing discussions popping up more and more about using tactical nuclear strikes. And it's fueled by the sheer intensity, the desperation of that conflict. And it's not just whispers anymore, is it? We've seen public figures like Russia's Medvedev and even U.S. President Trump openly talking about scenarios that, used to feel unthinkable in public discourse.
It's a shocking shift in rhetoric. It really highlights how quickly these things can move from, closed-door strategy sessions into the public domain, which is alarming in itself.
Definitely.
And the picture gets even more worrying when you broaden the view. Think back to May this year. India and Pakistan, two nuclear-armed nations with that incredibly tense border they had another flare-up, border clashes.
Right, that was serious.
It was, and Pakistan responded very deliberately, very publicly. They convened their National Command Authority. Now, this wasn't just some routine meeting. This was clear, unmistakable nuclear signaling. A direct message to the world, but especially to India, that their nuclear capabilities weren't just some abstract deterrent. They were an active part of their strategic thinking. It's a stark reminder of the dangers just simmering under the surface in that region.
And the hotspots just keep coming.
Yeah.
In June, we saw the Midnight Hammer operation that was the U.S.-backed Israeli strikes.
Yes.
Explicitly targeting Iranian underground nuclear facilities. The stated goal was, to disrupt Iran's nuclear program.
Trying to set it back.
Exactly. And while it's hard to know the full long-term impact from the outside, Iran's reaction was immediate and, frankly, defiant. They announced they were completely abandoning cooperation with the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Which is huge.
It's huge. It basically slammed the door shut on international oversight, signaling they intend to push ahead regardless. And then, of course, there's North Korea. Still a de facto nuclear state, consistently testing ballistic missiles, many of which could potentially carry nuclear warheads. It just adds another layer of unpredictability.
It really does. And if you just take those four situations we've mentioned, Russia, Ukraine, India, Pakistan, Israel, Iran, North Korea, you quickly see they involve, 6 nuclear-armed states?
Yeah.
Russia, the U.S., India, Pakistan, Israel, North Korea.
6 of them.
6. And then you add Iran, which we call a threshold state.
Right. Explain that term again.
Sure. A threshold state basically means they have the advanced nuclear technology. Like Iran reportedly has stocks of oxidized uranium, which is very close to weapons-grade material. So they have the capability to build a weapon relatively quickly, even if they haven't actually assembled one yet. They're right on the edge.
Okay. So 6 declared nuclear states plus a threshold state involved in just these recent flashpoints.
Yeah.
And globally, there are only 9 countries acknowledged to have nuclear weapons.
Exactly. So these conflicts involve 2/3 of the world's nuclear club, plus Iran teetering on the brink.
That really puts it in perspective.
It does. And I think for many people, maybe especially in Europe and the West, who perhaps felt a bit complacent after the Cold War ended, Well, now the nuclear threat feels incredibly immediate again, incredibly close. It's not some abstract historical thing anymore. It feels like a very real, present danger.
A return to a kind of fear we thought we'd left behind.
It truly is. And just to be clear about our focus for this deep dive, we are looking exclusively at nuclear weapons and the military risks associated with them. We're not really delving into civilian nuclear incidents like, say, the Fukushima disaster in 2011. Although, the lines between civilian and military nuclear programs can get blurry, and that's part of the problem we'll discuss.
Okay.
But the key takeaway, and this is echoed by intelligence communities and analysts worldwide, is that right now, this period we're in, is widely seen as one of the highest risk periods for nuclear war since the Cold War ended.
That's a chilling assessment. And hearing that immediately makes me think of, something that really captured that Cold War fear back in the day. I remember reading Tom Clancy's novel, The Sum of All Fears.
Yes. Classic Clancy.
Right. Published in 91. And he imagined this terrifying scenario. A small Israeli nuke, supposedly lost way back in the 73 war, ends up in the hands of some radical group.
Yeah.
And they detonate it in the U.S., but they make it look like it was the Soviets trying to trick the U.S. into launching a full-scale nuclear war against them. It was designed to show how easily things could spin out of control.
It was terrifying fiction then, but the parallel is chilling, isn't it?
It really is.
Because while that was fiction, the core idea, non-state actors getting their hands on sophisticated weapons, maybe even nuclear ones, feels disturbingly relevant in 2025. I mean, look at groups like Yemen's Houthis. They've shown they can not only launch, but also maintain and even improve short to medium-range ballistic missiles.
Yeah, their capabilities have surprised many.
They have, and think about it. A ballistic missile plus some kind of radioactive warhead, even if it's not weapons-grade fissile material, just radioactive waste, a so-called dirty bomb that is a type of nuclear weapon in terms of its potential for terror and contamination.
Right, delivered by missile.
Exactly. That's not just a novelist's nightmare anymore. It's a tangible threat that sort of bypasses the old state-for-state deterrence model.
And it's such a contrast to how seriously governments and even just ordinary people took the threat during the Cold War.
Yeah.
I was looking into this, and it's fascinating. If you look at old medical books or even popular science books like the 100,000 Whys series in China, especially editions from before, say, 1980, they actually had sections on how to survive a nuclear explosion. Detailed advice. Duck and cover, find clean water, build shelters. It wasn't hidden away. It was public information.
Civil defense was a real thing.
Exactly. It showed that governments, U.S., Soviet, Chinese, they really prioritized this knowledge. They saw it as essential public preparedness. The message was clear. This could happen, and you need to know what to do.
And that preparedness wasn't just theoretical. It was absolutely rooted in a real constant risk. We know from declassified documents, historical accounts, during the Cold War, think Cuban Missile Crisis, but also numerous other close calls, technical glitches, false alarms.
Stanislav Petrov.
Exactly. The U.S. and the Soviets came terrifyingly close to nuclear war multiple times, often due to simple miscalculation or faulty tech. We were literally minutes from annihilation sometimes, saved only by the judgment of a few individuals.
So the core question for us today then is, how are these new nuclear risks, the ones we face in 2025, fundamentally different from that very direct existential Cold War threat? What's changed, and maybe more disturbingly, what hasn't?
Right. And to really get our heads around that, we've identified three sort of defining features of today's nuclear threat landscape. Let's start with the first one, this really troubling idea that the taboo against using nuclear weapons might be fading. And with that, the risk of a small-scale nuclear conflict seems to be rising.
Okay, the fading taboo. How did it work in the Cold War?
Well, in the Cold War, the dominant strategy, the one everyone knows, was mutually assured destruction. MAD. Both the U.S. and the Soviets had these absolutely enormous arsenals, tens of thousands of warheads. And these were designed for total destruction. Cities, military bases, industrial centers, government hubs, usually using long-range, high-yield weapons. The whole point was total destruction as the ultimate deterrent.
The logic being nobody could win.
Precisely. If one side attacked, the other would absolutely retaliate with devastating force, ensuring both sides would be utterly wiped out. It made a first strike completely irrational because victory was impossible, only mutual annihilation. a grim sort of stability.
But that seems different from the language we hear now.
It's very different. Fast forward to 2025, and the conversation has shifted significantly, especially since the Russia-Ukraine war started. We hear this term thrown around a lot, tactical nuclear weapons.
Tactical nukes, yeah.
Conceptually, these are quite different from the massive Cold War bombs. We're talking smaller warheads, maybe with yields less than a kiloton up to, say, a few tens of kilotons, still incredibly destructive, mind you, often more powerful than Hiroshima, but smaller than the multi-megaton city busters.
And the idea is they'd be used differently.
That's the theory. They're typically designed for cruise missiles, short-range ballistic missiles, maybe even artillery. And they're supposedly aimed at specific military targets like a large tank formation, a command post, a key bridge, rather than wiping out entire cities. The language implies a more limited, targeted, and this is the dangerous part, potentially usable form of nuclear weapon.
That word usable is terrifying when talking about nukes.
It absolutely is. And what's really unsettling is that this idea of a controllable, small-scale nuclear fight isn't actually new. It echoes ideas from the very early Cold War.
Really? Back then?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Back in the 1950s, under Eisenhower's New Look strategy, and later Kennedy's flexible response, there was this theory of gradual escalation.
Gradual escalation.
The idea was you could start a nuclear conflict with very small yield weapons, things that sound almost absurd now, nuclear landmines, nuclear artillery shells.
Hand grenades. I read that somewhere.
Believe it or not, yes, nuclear hand grenades were developed. The theory was you could use these on the battlefield and then slowly ramp up the yield and range in a controlled way, keeping the conflict limited.
But that just sounds completely unrealistic in the heat of battle.
Exactly. That step-by-step model was pure theory. Military planners realized pretty quickly that in actual combat, nations would almost certainly skip steps to get a decisive advantage.
Right. Why use a nuclear mortar if the enemy's hitting your airfields with bigger bombs?
Precisely. You'd likely escalate immediately to take out their key assets. The fog of war, the pressure, the desire to win it would shatter any neat escalation ladder instantly.
So this flaw was recognized early on.
It was remarkably early.
Yeah.
As far back as the 1960s, President Lyndon Johnson famously said, and it's a powerful quote, "There is no such thing as a tactical nuclear weapon. Once used, escalation is almost unavoidable."
Wow. LBJ said that in the 60s.
He did. And that perspective was crucial. It led both superpowers to basically abandon that dangerous idea of controllable, small-scale nuclear war. They understood deep down that once you cross that nuclear threshold, once that line is breached, the genie is out. The path to uncontrollable devastation is almost guaranteed.
Which makes today's talk about tactical nukes even more worrying.
It's incredibly dangerous. It suggests we've either forgotten those hard-won, terrifying lessons or we're choosing to ignore them. It feels like a regression to that sort of superficial understanding of nuclear dangers from the 50s, an understanding that was quickly proven wrong by serious strategic thought. It's like collective amnesia, driven by current conflicts.
Okay, so that's the first feature, the fading taboo and the rise of tactical nuke discussions. What's the second defining feature of today's threat?
The second major feature is the rise of what we might call unsupervised threshold states.
Okay.
Think back to the end of the Cold War. The recognized nuclear powers were a fairly small, well-defined group. You had the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, the P5, US, Soviet Union, Russia, China, UK, France.
The official club.
Right. Plus India, Israel, and South Africa. Though South Africa, commendably, dismantled its program later. That was basically the nuclear landscape.
But things changed after the Cold War ended.
It was a real mixed picture. On the one hand, we saw some genuine deproliferation. Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Belarus, they gave up the Soviet nukes left on their territory, mostly under security assurances from the P5.
And South Africa, as you said.
In South Africa, a very positive step, dismantling its program for sanctions relief and rejoining the international community. Those were good signs.
What?
The worrying trend was that other threshold states, those nations with the know-how and potentially the materials actually crossed the line or got extremely close. Pakistan tested its weapons openly in 1998. North Korea defied everyone and became a de facto nuclear state. And Iran, as we discussed, has been hovering right on that threshold since the 90s, mastering the fuel cycle, getting dangerously close.
And the key difference with some of these is the oversight.
Right. That's the critical point. 4 of these states, Israel, India, Pakistan, and North Korea, never signed the main treaty, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT.
So they're outside the system.
Completely outside the system. They operate without any monitoring or safeguards from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. Israel's program is particularly opaque, started in the 60s, probably confirmed by a joint test with South Africa in '79, but still officially unacknowledged and totally unregulated internationally. This secrecy, this lack of any external oversight, is a huge part of the danger now. It creates these blind spots in global security.
And the risks aren't just about them potentially using a weapon?
No, far from it. Without any international supervision or inspection, we have no real idea about the safety protocols or maintenance standards at their military nuclear facilities.
Right. Accidents could happen.
Exactly. There's a real risk of accidental leaks, environmental contamination, maybe even a meltdown scenario at a secret facility with unknown safety measures. Think Chernobyl, but potentially involving weapons materials at an undeclared site.
And the other risk is proliferation, things getting out.
That's perhaps even more concerning from a global view. If these secretive programs are mismanaged, or if there's political instability, a coup, corruption, nuclear materials, or even just the technology and expertise could potentially fall into the hands of other states, maybe in more dangerous regions, or even non-state terrorist groups.
That's terrifying.
It creates truly uncontrollable risks. You can't really deter a terrorist group with Medodi. They don't have a state to retaliate against. It changes the entire game.
Okay, so fading taboo, unsupervised states. What's the third feature?
The third defining feature is the really widespread and frankly alarming spread of ballistic missile technology.
The delivery systems.
Exactly. At the end of the Cold War, the ability to actually build, maintain, and launch ballistic missiles was pretty much limited to the superpowers and maybe a couple of very close advanced allies. It required huge industrial capacity, technical skill, lots of money.
An exclusive club.
Very exclusive. But fast forward to 2025, and that landscape is unrecognizable. Ballistic missile tech has spread incredibly widely through black market sales, reverse engineering, sometimes deliberate transfers.
We mentioned the Houthis.
Right. Even non-state groups like the Houthis in Yemen have shown they can use, maintain, even modify ballistic missiles, often based on older designs. And beyond them, you have a whole range of states. Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran in the Middle East, India, Pakistan, and South Asia, all now capable of producing or using ballistic missiles, many with ranges over 1,000 kilometers. They can hit major cities far away.
So the means of delivery are much more common now.
Much more common. And this decentralization really amplifies the nuclear threat.
And you mentioned the dirty bomb risk earlier.
Yes, and this is where it gets really worrying. Even if you don't have a proper nuclear warhead, just putting radioactive material, industrial waste, medical isotopes onto a ballistic missile creates a radiological weapon, a dirty bomb.
It wouldn't explode like a nuke, but
it would disperse radiation over a huge area, cause mass panic, long-term health crises, make cities uninhabitable, a weapon of terror and disruption delivered potentially hundreds of miles away.
And the current rules don't really cover the missiles themselves.
That's a major blind spot. The International Oversight System, the NPT, the IAEA, it mainly focuses on the warheads and the special nuclear materials needed to make them, like highly enriched uranium or plutonium.
Not the delivery systems.
Not really, because missiles can theoretically carry conventional warheads too, so they often slip through the tightest nuclear proliferation controls. It's a regulatory loophole.
And this spread has a name.
Yeah, arms control experts are calling it the missile renaissance. It highlights just how fast this technology is advancing and spreading. And it creates this dangerous feedback loop.
How so?
Well, if a country sees its neighbors getting long-range missiles capable of hitting its territory, even if those missiles only carry conventional warheads now, that country might feel compelled to develop its own deterrent.
Like South Korea.
Exactly. South Korea developed impressive ballistic missiles, and then, partly in response to North Korea, started talking more openly about needing tactical nuclear weapons to put on those missiles. The delivery system itself starts driving the demand for nuclear warheads. It accelerates the whole dangerous cycle.
Okay, wow. So those three features, the fading taboo, unsupervised states, and widespread missiles, really paint a grim picture of the current threat.
They do. It's a much more complex, fragmented, and unpredictable landscape than the bipolar Cold War standoff.
So given that, let's shift gears a bit. How was the threat managed during the Cold War? How did we get through those decades without, blowing ourselves up.
Right. It's crucial to understand the mechanisms that, for all their flaws, did maintain a kind of stability. The first key element was psychological, that U.S.-Soviet balance of terror, or MAD, mutually assured destruction.
The foundation.
It really was. And built on that foundation was the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. This was a landmark diplomatic achievement hammered out primarily by the U.S., the Soviet Union, and the U.K. Signed in 1968, came into force March 5th, 1970, and it's been a cornerstone for, 55 years now? Signed by 190 countries, almost everyone.
So what did the NPT actually do? What were its core rules?
Well, Article 1 was quite clever strategically. It recognized 5 states that had already developed and tested nukes by January 1st, 1967, as legitimate nuclear powers.
And that date wasn't accidental.
Not at all. It conveniently lined up with the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council: the US, Soviets, China, UK, France. China actually joined the treaty formally later in 1992, but that core group status was baked in from the start. It gave them a unique and arguably privileged position.
And beyond recognizing those 5.
It established 3 fundamental pillars. First, non-proliferation. All the other countries that signed agreed not to develop or acquire nuclear weapons. Simple promise. Second, disarmament. The 5 legitimate nuclear states committed to pursue negotiations in good faith to reduce their own arsenals, and crucially, not to help non-nuclear states get the bomb or the tech.
So stop the spread and work towards getting rid of them eventually.
That was the deal. And third, the peaceful use of nuclear technology. This was important. It said all signatories could exchange info, materials, equipment for peaceful uses. Power plants, medicine, research, provided they accepted IAEA inspections, and reporting to verify it stayed peaceful.
And that's where the IAEA comes in strongly.
Exactly. After the NPT came into force, all the non-P5 signatories had to sign these comprehensive safeguards agreements with the IAEA. That committed them to IAEA regulation and on-site inspections of their declared peaceful nuclear activities. It was the verification mechanism designed to build trust and catch cheating.
So the NPT wasn't just about stopping bombs. It was also about enabling peaceful nuclear energy under supervision.
Correct. And this whole structure emerged from that crucial shift in thinking we talked about, moving away from the 1950s idea that nuclear war might be controllable or winnable,
to realizing it was absolute destruction.
Right. The sheer terrifying destructiveness became undeniable. There was no winning, only mutual catastrophe.
Which led to MAD.
Which led directly to the logic of MAD-BD. Nuclear strategy became less about military tactics and more about game theory psychology. With thousands of warheads poised on both sides, enough to end civilization, the idea was simple. Any first strike guarantees devastating retaliation. That second strike capability made launching first totally irrational. The balance of terror.
Grim, but it worked, in a way.
It did. And this horror balance, as some called it, had a profound consequence. The 5 nuclear powers realized their own survival depended not just on managing their own risk, but actively preventing proliferation elsewhere.
They needed to stop others from getting the bomb, too.
Absolutely. More nuclear states meant more instability, more complexity, higher chances of accidents or miscalculations, sparking a global chain reaction. So this consensus formed, actively discouraging allies or potential rivals like Sweden, West Germany, even Yugoslavia from going nuclear, even if they had the technical means. That shared interest in preventing wider proliferation became the bedrock of the whole system. It was self-preservation on a global scale.
Okay, so MAD and the NPT framework were key. What else helped manage the threat?
The second point is how neatly the system aligned with the global power structure that emerged after World War II. The NPT recognizing the P5 wasn't just politics, it reflected reality.
How so?
These 5 nations simply had the largest populations, biggest economies, strongest industrial bases, and crucially, the most advanced missile technology and the infrastructure needed for nuclear weapons. The treaty, in a sense, just formalized the existing power dynamic.
And they used that power to control technology spread.
Informally, yes. While enforcing the NPT, the P5 also effectively controlled the export of key technologies, especially ballistic missiles.
Like the Soviets.
Yeah, the Soviet example is interesting. They did export short-range missiles to allies, like Warsaw Pact countries. But they followed 2 rules. First, the tech was always a generation behind their own best stuff to prevent allies from getting too capable or accidentally escalating things. Second, they only transferred finished missiles, not the factories or blueprints to build them. Allies remained dependent.
Kept them on a leash, basically.
In a way. And the U.S. did something similar but different within NATO through nuclear sharing.
Right. putting U.S. bombs in Europe.
Exactly. Small U.S. nuclear bombs stored in places like Belgium, West Germany, Italy, Netherlands, even Canada for a time. But, and this is key, those bombs remained under strict U.S. control. You needed a dual-key system, both U.S. and Allied approval, to ever use them.
And the deal was?
The deal was, in exchange for being under the U.S. nuclear umbrella, the promise the U.S. would retaliate with nukes if they were attacked. These allies agreed not to build their own nuclear weapons. It removed the incentive for key partners to proliferate.
So formal treaties combined with informal tech control and alliances.
Precisely. It created a structure where the P5 maintained their monopoly and limited the spread of the most dangerous technologies. It wasn't just diplomacy. It was structural power that helped the oversight system work for a long time, preventing a free-for-all nuclear arms race.
Okay. And the third element of control.
The third element was the positive and really essential role played by the IAEA itself, the International Atomic Energy Agency.
We mentioned their inspections.
Yes, but they have this tricky dual mandate. On one hand, they actively help non-nuclear states develop peaceful nuclear programs for energy, medicine, science. That's vital for development. But at the same time, they have to verify those programs stay peaceful through those rigorous inspections.
Fostering use while preventing misuse.
Tough balance.
A very tough balance. And they have an enforcement mechanism, too, if their inspectors find undeclared activities or noncompliance.
They report it. They report their findings directly to the UN Security Council. The UNSC then decides what to do. Could be diplomatic pressure, sanctions, other measures. It gives the IAEA's technical findings real political weight.
So the IAEA wasn't just a watchdog, it was also a facilitator of peaceful tech.
Absolutely. It upheld the right of non-nuclear states to benefit from atomic energy, while simultaneously providing that crucial layer of global supervision and linking it to the UN's enforcement power. That comprehensive role was profoundly important for stability for many, many decades. It stopped proliferation countless times before it could even start.
Okay, so that system, MAD, NPT, P5 control, IAEA oversight, worked for a long time, more or less. But now you're saying it's facing serious, maybe even existential challenges.
That's right. The system is under immense strain, and the first major challenge really strikes at its credibility. The problem of double standards and the deep insecurity that creates for threshold states.
Double standards.
Well, look at the IAEA. Despite being an international body, its operations rely heavily on funding from the P5, especially the U.S. That financial link inherently limits its independence.
Money talks.
It does. Plus, the IAEA doesn't have its own spy agency or enforcement arm. It depends on intelligence shared by the P5 intelligence, which can be selective or biased, and it needs the UNSC's political will to act on its findings. This structure makes it vulnerable to P5 influence.
And that connects to the difficulty of monitoring.
Yes, because peaceful nuclear activities processing uranium, enrichment, handling plutonium from spent fuel look almost identical to the early steps of making a bomb.
The dual-use problem again.
Exactly. It's incredibly hard to know the intent just by looking at the activity. And the IAEA can generally only inspect facilities that countries declare. If a country hides a parallel secret program, the IAEA might never know unless an outside power, usually one of the P5, tips them off with intelligence. It's a huge vulnerability.
So dependency and inherent ambiguity. How does that lead to double standards?
It creates what you could call a good kid, bad kid dynamic, heavily skewed by P5 politics. Take South Korea in 2004. The IAEA found undeclared uranium enrichment and plutonium separation work serious stuff, potentially weapons-related.
We should have gone to the Security Council.
By the book, yes. But the U.S., wanting to keep its ally South Korea happy, put pressure on. The report was essentially buried, never formally discussed by the UNSC. Political interests trumped the rules.
Wow. Okay, compare that to...
Compare that to India in 2008. India tested nukes in '98, never signed the NPT. It's an acknowledged nuclear state outside the treaty. Yet the U.S. pushed through a special safeguards deal for India with the IAEA.
Why?
Primarily commercial interests. U.S. and European nuclear companies saw a huge market in India for civilian reactors. So a non-signatory nuclear state got preferential treatment, access to advanced tech, bypassing the very rules others are held to. It sent a terrible message. Rules are flexible if powerful countries have other interests.
You can see how that would erode trust.
Profoundly. States like North Korea and Iran look at these examples and see the system as rigged. They start to think, why cooperate? Why open ourselves up to inspections that could be used against us based on the political whims of the P5? It fosters deep insecurity and cynicism, making them less likely to cooperate, not more. They see cooperation as a potential trap.
Which logically leads to the second major challenge.
Yeah.
This pattern where defying the system seems to pay off better than complying.
It's a deeply troubling pattern, a really bad psychological suggestion, as you put it. Looking at the big nuclear crises of the last 30 years, states that defied pressure often got away with it or even benefited, while those who complied sometimes suffered terrible consequences.
Let's look at Iraq.
Right. Iraq under Saddam Hussein definitely had a secret nuclear program in the 80s. After the 91 Gulf War, they were forced into intense UN inspections, IAEA, plus the US-dominated UN SCOM.
They found things.
Oh yeah. Illicit uranium imports, hidden enrichment attempts. US intelligence was key, pushing hard. By 97, Iraq had been forced to destroy most of its nuclear materials and equipment. They were arguably in compliance, even if coerced.
But the outcome?
The outcome. The U.S. invaded in 2003 anyway, using the false pretext that Iraq still had WMDs, including nukes. So Iraq's compliance, its disarmament under pressure, didn't save it. The message to others: giving in might just make you more vulnerable.
Chilling. Now contrast that with North Korea.
Totally different story. The first crisis hit in 93 over their undeclared activities, but instead of a unified international response via the IAEA or UNSC, the U.S. cut a bilateral deal, the 1994 Agreed Framework.
What was the deal?
U.S. promised light water reactors for energy, plus food aid. In return, North Korea would freeze its program and, crucially, no IAEA inspections for 8 years. A huge concession.
Why did the U.S. agree to that?
They basically miscalculated, expecting the North Korean regime to collapse soon. And they failed to deliver the promised reactors on time anyway, partly due to politics back in Washington.
So what happened during those 8 years?
North Korea used the time, without inspections, to secretly advance its nuclear research significantly. By 2002, the deal collapsed completely. Both sides walked away. And just 4 years later, 2006, North Korea conducts its first nuclear test. Boom, they became a nuclear power.
So their defiance worked.
Their defiance, their deep distrust of the U.S., their refusal to fully comply it ultimately allowed them to get the bomb. They learned the opposite lesson from Iraq. Resistance pays.
And Iran has been watching both of these.
Absolutely. Iran's approach seems carefully calibrated based on these examples. Their goal seems to be strategic ambiguity. Getting to the threshold of having a weapon, using that capability as leverage for sanctions relief and regional power without necessarily building the actual bomb right away.
They accepted some inspections initially.
Yes, generally, though often with delays and concealment. But U.S. policy towards Iran has been incredibly inconsistent, swinging from diplomacy, like the JCPOA deal, to maximum pressure and sanctions. No lasting solution.
So Iran looks at Iraq, complied, got invaded, and North Korea defied, got nukes.
And it seems to conclude that compliance makes you rogue, while defiance, or reaching that threshold status, deters attack.
And the recent Israeli strikes.
That seems to have solidified their thinking. After those strikes in June, Iran didn't just accelerate enrichment, they pulled out of IAEA cooperation entirely. Stopped reporting. It's the ultimate challenge to the oversight system, basically saying, we're going our own way because compliance doesn't protect us. It shows how the perceived benefits of defiance can tragically outweigh the incentives for transparency.
Okay. And the third major challenge today.
The third one is the complete stall in U.S.-Russia nuclear disarmament.
We made progress during the Cold War, right?
Huge progress, especially in the 70s and 80s. Landmark treaties like START, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaties, focused on cutting the numbers of verifiable big-ticket items. Strategic bombers, submarine-launched missiles, ICBMs. These were relatively easy to count and monitor.
But that stopped.
Pretty much ground to a halt after START-I expired back in 2001. U.S.-Russia arms control talks have largely stagnated since then.
Why the change?
A big part of it is a shift in strategic thinking. Both countries seem less focused now on preventing an all-out global thermonuclear war and more focused on managing risks in potential high-stakes regional conflicts where they might get involved.
Which brings us back to
tactical nuclear weapons. This shift has led both sides to put renewed emphasis on and produce more of these smaller, supposedly battlefield-usable nukes. CLI estimates Russia's made maybe 2,300 new tactical warheads in the last decade. The U.S. maybe 200, 300.
But these are harder to control.
Extremely hard. Unlike giant ICBMs and silos, tactical nukes are smaller, more portable, can be fitted to many different systems. There's no real international agreement on how to count or verify them. Arms control for tactical nukes is incredibly difficult.
And the danger?
The danger is it fuels that illusion of limited or controllable nuclear war we talked about earlier. More broadly, when the two biggest nuclear powers aren't making progress on disarmament, it removes any incentive for other nuclear states, especially the non-NPT ones like India, Pakistan, Israel, to limit their own arsenals. Why should they cap their programs if the giants aren't cutting back? It undermines the whole global non-proliferation effort.
Okay, so the challenges are immense. Double standards, defiance paying off, stalled disarmament. Given all that, what is the path forward? Is the system salvageable?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Our first point here is maybe counterintuitive but crucial. Despite all its flaws, the existing nuclear oversight mechanism, the NPT framework, the IAEA must be maintained. It's better than nothing.
Why? Given the problems.
Because the fundamental challenge, that inseparable link between civilian and military nuclear tech, the dual-use problem hasn't gone away. It makes perfect verification almost impossible under any system.
You mentioned an attempt to fix that, centralizing fuel production.
Yes, back in 2003, the IAEA floated this idea: create an international body, maybe like a fuel bank, under strict supervision, to handle all sensitive nuclear material processing and fuel production globally.
How would that work?
Non-nuclear states needing fuel for power plants or research isotopes would apply to this international bank. They wouldn't need their own enrichment or reprocessing facilities, eliminating the risk of diversion. It seemed logical, even got funding offers from people like Warren Buffett.
But it failed. Why?
Interestingly, the main opposition wasn't from the P5. It came from other major civil nuclear powers: Germany, Netherlands, Japan, Brazil, Argentina. They basically said, wait a minute, we have advanced peaceful programs. Why should we give up our capabilities and become dependent on an international body potentially dominated by the P5? We want to share in this too.
National interests and technological pride got in the way.
Exactly. And countries like Iran flatly refused to give up their sovereign right to process fuel. So the centralization idea collapsed.
Which leaves us with the current imperfect system.
Right. And the conclusion is, flawed as it is, the NPT system is still better than a complete free-for-all. It does guarantee the right to peaceful nuclear energy for states that comply, which is fairer than concentrating everything in a few hands. It provides a framework, however strained, for oversight, for dialogue, for accountability. Tearing it down without a viable replacement would be incredibly dangerous. We have to work within it, try to reform it, uphold it.
Okay. Maintain the flawed system. What's the final crucial point?
The final point, and this is perhaps less about treaties and more about mindset, is that we absolutely must reject the concept of limited nuclear war as a dangerous, bankrupt ideology.
The idea that tactical nukes are usable.
Precisely. This notion, which serious strategists debunked decades ago, is disturbingly creeping back into discussions around current regional conflicts.
Why is it so dangerous?
Well, think about modern conventional warfare. There's often this cold calculation, right? Balancing military gains against economic costs, political stability back home, trying to keep conflicts contained.
Yeah.
Applying that logic to nuclear weapons is where it becomes fundamentally anti-human. The idea of using small tactical nukes implies you can somehow calculate an acceptable level of death and destruction. It suggests some populations, some cities, some industries are more expendable than others in a nuclear exchange.
It turns human lives into variables in an equation.
Exactly. It's a chilling calculus that reduces human beings to collateral damage in a strategic game. That's a mindset humanity must never, ever accept. And beyond the morality, the idea that any nuclear exchange could remain limited is pure fantasy. The fog of war, miscalculation, political pressure, the sheer terror escalation would be almost impossible to control once that threshold is crossed.
The line between tactical and strategic is just too thin, too blurry.
It's razor thin and likely non-existent in reality. Once nukes start flying, predicting where it stops is impossible. The only way to prevent a future where lives are weighed and sacrificed like that
Is to make sure it never happens in the first place.
Exactly. The absolute horror of nuclear weapons is the ultimate deterrent. And that deterrent only works if the line is never, ever crossed.
A sobering but vital conclusion. The nuclear threat in 2025 isn't just real, it's complex, it's evolving, and understanding it, really understanding it, is the first essential step towards managing it responsibly.
Couldn't agree more. Awareness is key.
And as we always emphasize, knowledge is that first step. So as we wrap up, just one final reminder, do check out Hui Wang's A History of China series on Amazon. Whether you're interested in China's ancient roots or later periods like the Jin Dynasty, his books are a fantastic resource, detailed, engaging, a real treasure for history lovers.
Definitely worth your time. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into today's nuclear dangers. It's a complex topic, but a crucial one. Until next time, stay informed and please stay safe.